Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of Catching-101 TV. Really excited about today's guest. It's a little bit different than the guys we've had on in the past, but the guy that we have today, he reached out to me on social media, and he works for Marc Pro, a company that I'm super familiar with, and I promote their products. And full disclosure, I have bought a Marc Pro. I use the Marc Pro Plus at home. It wasn't given to me for free or anything like that, so I'm a paying customer. But we have Tim Desmarais is on, who works for Marc Pro, which is one of the most popular recovery modalities for professional baseball players and amateur baseballs alike. And I just wanted to talk to Tim about recovery a little bit. And Tim, I appreciate you coming on with us.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Man, no problem. So, I've spoken to the people who are watching this are probably familiar with some of the things I've done in the past and how much I've emphasized, catchers and all baseball players, really becoming better athletes. And I think a lot of that, talks about the nutrition and the strength training and the playing games, but also talks about the sleep and the recovery as well. So I'd like to hear from you first. I've heard you speak before and you've got some great information, and I definitely want to talk about the Marc Pro. But before we kind of start, what would be your baseline definition of what is recovery? If you're a high school athlete or you're a parent and you maybe hear the term, we got to work on our recovery. We want to get recovered. What does that necessarily mean, or what does that look like, for an athlete?
Yeah, so I always look at recovery as the strength phase after the stimulus of training. So I think one thing that people often get confused about is you go out and you work out, that's making you stronger. And that's actually not the case. At the end of your workout, you're not nearly as strong as you are at the beginning of your workout. Obviously, you're not going to do the 1-rep max at the end. So that recovery phase, which is the 24 to 48 hours after you do your workout, is where you get stronger. Your body heals itself. It takes that stimulus of the workout and responds to it so that you can do more of that work in the future. It's basically you've sent your body a message, and the recovery is your body's action towards that message. So when we look at recovery, any modality that's out there that's helping with recovery is going to specifically be harnessing innate systems in the body to fix itself. So recovery is repair.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I think a lot of people want to think of it as, what can get me back on the field or back to 100% faster. That's kind of what I think of it in my
Yeah.
mind. After a workout or after a game or after a tournament or whatever it is, your body is, let's say, beat down, for lack of a better word. And we're trying to recover. We're trying to get back to 100%.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can get super technical with it, but that's a great overview.
Okay. Well, good. So like I said, I know there are a lot of different modalities out there, and I'll be honest, I think there's a time and place for all of them. I mean, I have a Theragun, I have a foam roller, I like the tools and the gizmos and the gadgets when it comes to this stuff. But a couple of years
I have
ago,
all those too.
and I think there's a place for all of them. If I had to be honest, the Marc Pro probably is my favorite. And even though I'm not necessarily an athlete anymore, I still use it every day after I train legs, and in particular other body parts. But what is it exactly that the Marc Pro does? Just kind of a broad overview, and then we can kind of get more into the details.
Sure. So we categorize Marc Pro, the action of the Marc Pro, which is an e-stim device, as active recovery but perfected. So most people have heard of active recovery. It's moving your muscles. Moving your muscles, the contraction is going to create better blood flow and lymphatic drainage. The difficulty with most active recovery is, one, people don't want to do it. It's an additional mental strain, but you still put an additional stress on tendons and joints. You're going to burn glycogen stores, that kind of thing. So what Marc Pro does is it creates those contractions for you, will never fatigue the muscle, will never damage the muscle, and you can completely flush out a muscle post-workout or post-throwing or whatever it is you're doing. Hopefully not just for recovery, but to reduce injuries, to increase range of motion. Some people use it to help with sleep, but basically we're creating contractions that help the body.
Okay. And again, I want to just, hopefully interpret and make sure I'm understanding you correctly, and make sure that everybody's listening is doing the same as well. So we talk about active recovery. I mean, I think it's pretty well established that active recovery is going to be better form of, than just a passive recovery where you just sleep or just rest. And the main purpose of that is to send new blood and to send new nutrients into the muscle that's just been worked. Is that correct?
So that's, at least in my estimation of it, that's about 30%. So obviously we want oxygen and nutrient distribution through blood flow, right? Like increased blood flow, better stuff gets there to repair.
Mhm.
But the other 70% is what most people overlook, and that's the lymphatic side. So a lot of people don't really understand lymphatic system, but it is basically there's a lot of vessels throughout your muscles, just like your blood system. But those are filled with lymph fluid, and the lymph vessels actually pull waste into them and evacuate them from that area. So, for instance, if you're a catcher and you're in your squat position the whole game, your quads are going to be on fire, your calves are going to be on fire. Part of that's obviously the stimulus of the workout, but every time you burn energy, you create waste. Just like a car, when you burn gas, you get exhaust. Your body does the same thing. And if we don't remove that exhaust from that area, that's going to impede our recovery. So yeah, we want to get good stuff in through blood, but we also want to get all the bad stuff out. Most commonly, people call it lactic acid. It's really an array of other things, but it doesn't really matter. Whatever you want to call it, you want to make sure that it doesn't remain in the muscle, because if it adheres to the muscle, that's what's going to cause those long-term injuries. That's what's going to, like players that get hurt not playing their sport and because they didn't warm up for climbing stairs or tying their shoe. Those are the things we want to make sure we get rid of.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things that gets overlooked. And I think it's important to understand why it's so important. It's not just, well, after the workout, I wanted to make sure I cooled down. Yeah, the temperature has something to do with it, but it's more about making sure that nothing gets stuck in there.
And that mostly happens through muscle contractions, correct?
That's the only way. Your lymphatic system doesn't have a heart to drive that fluid through, so it relies entirely on the muscle contracting around the vessel. So if this was your vessel, you'd squeeze it, it would move the fluid into the next chamber, and then the first chamber is a vacuum, it pulls in more waste. So every time you contract that muscle, it moves waste out. The problem with a real workout or a game situation is you're going to be creating more waste than you're evacuating at that time, so you have to do that cool down period after.
Okay. And from what I understand, the problem with, let's say older forms of recovery, let's say a pitcher or a catcher, hey, you just got
Mm-hmm.
finished pitching, go out and run, 25 poles. The difference is you,
Yeah.
you need to have the muscle contractions to remove the waste, but at some point you don't want it to be fatiguing. You don't want it to be a separate workout. You don't want to, you
Right.
know, and that's where kind of the Marc Pro comes in.
Yeah, there's two separate issues there. One, the one you mentioned where you're doing an additional form of a workout. Like if you're in recovery, like glycogen stores are huge for energy reproduction. So if you're out running again and you're using large leg muscles to do that, you're going to be burning some of those stores you're trying to recover. On top of that, if you're running legs, it's a lot harder to recover your arms and vice versa. There's some benefit to it. So I don't think poles are running poles is as villainous as some people make it out to be, but I definitely don't think it's nearly as effective as most people make it out to be. And that's exactly where the Marc Pro comes in, is you can finish your workout I have a lot of high school players in particular, they're using it on the car ride home on legs or arms. And then by the time they're home, that muscle's flushed out. So it's a mental break from the workout. It's a mental break after. I actually have a bunch of guys that use it while playing video games. And it's a lot more convenient, where you can sit down and relax and watch a movie or do whatever and still reap the benefits of the active recovery.
Yeah, and that's kind of in my mind. I kind of think of it as like a passive active recovery, where it's
Oh
active
yeah,
recovery, but you're doing it sitting on your couch. You're doing it while you're playing video
exactly.
games or whatever. And
Hmm.
now let me ask you this. So you mentioned the term a couple times, and I can attest. You say it's non-fatiguing, and that's one of the big
Yeah,
selling points. Like I say, after you use it, your muscles they're not going to be sore. There's not going to be fatigue there. Like I said, I can tell you firsthand. That's why I use it, because I like it and I believe it works.
yeah,
In the past, I've also tried like TENS units, which to someone on the outside who
hmm
may be unfamiliar with them, that they probably look very similar. You put
yeah. They do.
the pads on your body, and it makes the muscle contract, but it feels very, very different. So
Yeah,
I'd love for you to take just a minute and kind of explain the difference between what a TENS unit does and kind of
sure.
what the Marc Pro does.
And I'm glad you asked about it, because that's probably the number one thing that people conflate is TENS units versus Marc Pro, which is considered an EMS unit, or even like E-stim units that gets used at chiropractor offices or PTs, excuse me. Um, E-stim in general, haven't had the opportunity to get exposed to it enough to understand the differences. So there's three main categories. There's TENS that you mentioned. It's an acronym. The main goal of TENS is temporary pain control. So that's historically been prescribed to people that have a pain cycle, chronic pain, that sort of thing. And they're going to use the TENS unit to override that pain and get a relief or a break from it. On the other end, those PTs and chiros, those are really rehab signals. So if you have an atrophying muscle because you have an injury and you can't activate it, they want to make sure they activate it so you don't lose more muscle fibers from the injury. Marc Pro is considered EMS, which our FDA indication for is muscle recovery, period. That's not TENS, that's not the rehab signal. And EMS, electrical muscle stimulation, is primarily for moving fluids or recovery post-workout. So the main two ways we get used is right after a workout. In baseball, historically, it's been pitchers, but we know that catchers have a significant need for it. Or they're using it if they have swelling and they can basically pump that swelling out, because that's the whole lymphatic side.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about one other thing it's kind of related to that. One of the things, I think the selling points, at least when I kind of initially started to research it and study about it, the Marc Pro has what's called a decaying waveform.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'd love to kind of hear you explain that a little bit. Because in my mind, I believe I know how it works, but I want to make sure I explain it correctly. So what exactly is the decaying waveform, and how is that, slightly different?
Sure. So even in that EMS category I previously mentioned, there are other products. I don't need to name any names, but of those other products, they use a toned down version of the rehab signal. So it's a lot harsher, but by toning it down, they can use it for a longer period of time, and there is some recovery benefits. What sets Marc Pro apart in our category is we don't just take a square signal, basically firing every muscle fiber, hold on and drop out. We actually gather those muscle fibers and release it. That decaying that you mentioned is a exponentially decaying wave. So it doesn't step down. It doesn't just drop out. It actually releases those muscle fibers, which is a lot similar to how you fire your own muscle than any other E-stim signal out there. We also have a much longer signal. It's in microseconds, so it's harder to tell, but we fall within the range of how quickly you can fire your own muscle. So the end result is it's a lot more comfortable because your muscle is acting in a way it normally would on its own, but it's also non-fatiguing because the muscle is acting as it normally would, but without having to create the energy for it. So there's no ATP burn. So the main difference between the two is the shape and the length, and that allows us to not hurt the muscle, not fatigue the muscle. You can use the Marc Pro indefinitely without injury and get all the benefits. That being said, most people really only need 20 to 30 minutes post-workout. Our manual will say an hour just to make sure we get everything done. But in instances where there's significant damage, you could leave it on for several hours or fall asleep with it on and not be concerned about it hurting you.
Okay. Well, and I'm glad you worded it like that, because that's kind of the analogy I had in my mind of, let's say, another unit that doesn't have the decaying waveform. It's like a light switch where it's on or it's off, and it activates the muscle, and then the muscle's not activated, versus a slider where you can gradually, and it happens quickly, but you can gradually activate the muscle and gradually deactivate it and let it contract and so on and so forth. So
so that light switch waveform, if your athlete could do that on his own, he'd be the greatest athlete of all time, because he'd have instant muscle fiber recruitment. Unfortunately, we don't have that. So the Marc Pro advantage is that we're doing what your body does. It's pretty simple, but the end result is very effective.
Okay. That's interesting. And I think these are good things to know. One of the things we talked about earlier, there are a lot of different, there's a lot of different things, whether, like I said, a lacrosse ball, a foam roller, a massage gun, sleep. When we talk about the Marc Pro specifically, it seems like in the baseball, I know it's popular among all sports, but it's really been popular in the baseball world. And I think that started with pitchers. It seems like that's where a lot of the trends start, and then they kind of get filtered down into other positions or other groups. What is it about the baseball world in particular that's made this thing so popular?
So a couple things. There's at the pro level, we currently have every Major League Baseball team using Marc Pro and using it extensively, and that normally goes through the ATCs. So your athletic trainers. In baseball, in particular, it's been mostly pitchers because the need is so acute. Like it's basically arm care. Pitchers can use it for legs, they can use it for hips. They're using all of that. It's full body action, but arm care is obviously the big concern. So we took off in baseball because we showed significant benefit to baseball players, whether that's through Driveline Baseball did their own study in-house. They showed better elbow stabilization. Eric Cressy has jumped on board because of his influence, or through Corey Kluber, who is sworn by the Marc Pro. So we were very fortunate in baseball to have some very big names talk about us because their experience was so positive with Marc Pro. In we obviously were used in most other sports, but baseball, I would say, is 20 to 30% of our business now. And also because the pipeline in baseball is so good, from youth sports up to the pros. That being said, pitchers are mainly the ones that use it. I have a few hitters, I have a few catchers, which I think, in my opinion, is a detriment to catchers in particular. It's a very tough position. You have to have a tough mentality, but that doesn't mean you can't focus on things that will improve your body's response to the workout or the stimulus or whatever it is. And obviously you can probably speak to that better than me, since I've never been a catcher, since like Little League. So it's been a while.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's catching on, and I think more guys are using it. But again, I still feel like the catching world, sometimes it takes us a little while to catch up, to get people to really buy
Mm-hmm.
into to everything that takes place, from the
Yeah.
training or the hip mobility or ankle mobility or the recovery modalities, and everything
Mm-hmm.
like that. So if you were writing a plan, I guess, for a catcher, should
Mm-hmm.
they use it every day? Would they use it on their legs and then their arm? What do you think? Again, you've got a catcher wants to start using Marc
Yeah.
Pro. How would you suggest they use it?
To be honest, for almost every catcher, I'd start with hips and calves. Obviously, that up and down motion, and they're either throwing from their knees or they're standing up to throw all the time. Um, their arm could benefit from it, but hips and calves are going to be huge. For my experience with catchers, overdevelopment of the quads is going to pull into the knees, but the ability to get more dorsiflexion out of the ankle is going to help almost all of that. You have better stability in your squat. So focusing on the calves, you're going to see better dorsiflexion through the ankle. And then focusing on the hips, that's basically your leverage point from upper body to lower body. So you're going to have a huge advantage there. The main thing, and to answer the other question, is yes, use it every single day. The benefit to a non-fatiguing contraction is that we don't have to be concerned about overusing it or causing additional damage. So at some point, if you overuse it, you're just no longer getting additional benefit, but you're never going to get in that bell curve into damage. So use it as much as possible.
Now,
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Along those lines, there are a number of, I guess, strengths that you can do. You can, it has a dial where you turn and it goes, I believe, from
Mm-hmm.
0 to 10. I feel like the sweet spot for
9.
me usually is somewhere, okay, usually in the six,
Yeah.
depending on which muscle groups, usually in the 6 to 7 range. When the
Mm-hmm.
muscles contractions are stronger, let's say we start to crank it up, are there any
Mm-hmm.
additional benefits? Does does the waste removal happen faster than if I had kept it on a more, a lower 2 or 3?
Yeah, not to be obtuse, but I'm gonna answer that in a little bit of a roundabout way. So when we put the pads on, there's a manual that obviously comes in the book. It gives you very generic pad placements. They're easy to follow, but really you're just looking for the densest part of the muscle. You're gonna put the pads on there. There's 2 pads per channel. Both pads have to be on. Once you find that position and you turn the device on, one, you want to make sure that the body part itself is in a relaxed position, so it's not in tension. So you're not like, if you have it on your arm, it's not flopping around. If it's on your calf, you're not walking around. You're in a relatively sedate position. As you turn it on, what you're talking about with intensity is it goes from 0 to 9. That's basically voltage. our goal is to get as high as you can with that without it being uncomfortable or you fighting that contraction for what you mentioned, more muscle fiber recruitment. The higher that number, the faster and more effective we can be in that treatment. But we also don't want to get to the point where you feel like you're resisting the contraction, because that's going to potentially fatigue the muscle because you're basically countering a contraction, which is a workout. So really simple, go as high as it's comfortable. If they're stinging or biting, move the pad. You shouldn't ever have that. But if there is, it's just not clearly communicating with the muscle. Move it, it'll be fixed. It's really simple. A lot of people tend to overthink it, but stick it on, turn it on, get comfortable, let it do its job.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting to me about it is, and like I said, I compare it to a TENS unit just because that's what I have experience
Mm-hmm.
with. And you can get TENS units, generic Chinese ones that are, 50 or $75. And when you put those on and you start to crank that up, like I would say, I feel like I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but it can hurt.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
looks like it hurts. When you put on the Marc
Mm-hmm.
Pro, you can still get a really strong contraction, but there's not a pain there. There's not a it definitely doesn't ever hurt. So even though it looks
Yep.
like, if you see somebody that has these pads on them and they're twitching, it's not
Yeah.
painful at all. So that's one of the interesting things that I noticed when I started using it.
Yeah. And of the things we've mentioned so far, they all play a role in that, is that decaying waveform. We're preset at 2 hertz, so twice a second, versus TENS units can go up to 200 hertz, 200 times a second. Your muscle can't do that. So there's a lot of things at play. If someone's watching and they really want to see something interesting, look up the Marc Pro Water Challenge. We have athletes that are trying to drink water with it on their arm. As silly as it looks, and it might even look painful, it doesn't hurt at all. It's just really silly. So it has nothing to do with recovery, but you'll see people that it's not painful. They're giggling and they're laughing. If you start seeing videos of them, people have them on their quads and they're twitching up a storm. I've had athletes' legs bouncing off the chair and it doesn't hurt. At that point, if you're bouncing that much, you might feel like you're resisting and would still want to turn it down. But generally speaking, if it doesn't hurt at a 2, it's not going to hurt at a 9. And that's just the miracle of the proprietary signal, that our signal has been around in the medical world for 40 years from our parent company. But Marc Pro wanted to bring that to athletes about 8-9 years ago. And since then it's really taken off.
Okay, that's interesting. So, man, I definitely appreciate your time, and I don't want to spend
Sure.
a ton of time. I know we scheduled about 30 minutes, and we're about at 25
Yeah.
minutes right now. I know you're immersed in this world. You with Marc Pro, and what you do full time. Are there any questions that I didn't ask that a parent should maybe know? Is there any information that I left out that might be
Yeah.
pertinent to a catcher or to a parent of a catcher?
Sure. I think the most important thing is, if it's something you're considering purchasing, if you go on our website, there are 2 different units. And this is going to sound weird from a sales perspective, but I would highly recommend for any athlete that's purchasing one to get the less expensive one. We have 2 units. I'll show you super fast. There's the Marc Pro and then the Marc Pro Plus.
Mm-hmm.
The Plus is much more expensive, and this is really designed for athletic trainers and professionals. It has a pain control setting. You can potentially hurt yourself with this. We want athletes to use this one. The small one, it's a lot more convenient, but it's nearly impossible to hurt yourself with it. So just as, like I said, I'd love to take more money from people, but I really want them to spend less money and be a lot safer, especially if they have, high school, college student that is going to be using it on their own, hopefully using it on their own. We want them to be as safe and as effective as possible.
Well, I probably went a little overboard. I got the Big Daddy. I got the Marc Pro Plus.
Oh no, it's totally fine if you do. I always like to make sure when I see those pop up on the sales report, is I make sure I make a coaching call to them so they can understand the differences and how to use it effectively. In your position as a coach, having that high frequency, which is a whole separate conversation, is amazing to have. It's just knowing when to use it. And to be honest, when you give a kid a unit, he sees high, he thinks it's more intense, he wants to be more intense.
That makes sense. And You also said, there are two different, price options, which I know when I bought mine, I don't know if you guys still do. I think there was, I think I could pay interest free over like the course of a year or
Yep.
10 months or whatever it was. So if that's still available, that would be a good option for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
So on the pricing, obviously you now have a discount code that we're making available to people that know you. I think it's ZAN, ZAN.
XAN,
That'll
yeah.
give anyone, yes, that'll give anyone a 10% discount on either unit. But to what you're talking about, we do offer through our website a no interest payment plan. So it'll split the cost of the unit into 12 separate payments. The first payment includes tax, but after that, they're all the same. So for instance, on the Marc Pro, it's $52.43. So it turns into less than the cost of a single massage, but you can use it every day after every workout. And you're not paying anything additional to do a payment plan.
Yeah.
Because we deal with a lot of high school and college athletes, it's something we felt obligated to do, and it's really been well received.
Yeah. Well, Tim, man, I definitely appreciate the time and you coming on and really explaining all this stuff. Like I said, when I bought mine probably a couple of years ago now, and I felt like I
Mhm.
researched it till I was blue in the face, just because that's what I do. If I've got to buy something,
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time researching and making sure that what I'm gonna get is a good value and it does what it's supposed to do. But it's always helpful to talk to somebody like you, who knows it inside and out. Like I said, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of it, but having this conversation
Oh,
is
sure.
definitely helpful and beneficial. So I'll put the discount code on the screen so people can find it and they can
Okay.
find the website, just to make it easy. But Tim, man, I really appreciate it. Like I said, you reached out on social media, and I think you're absolutely right. I think in the catching world, I don't think many people really emphasize the recovery the way they should. And Marc Pro is, it's one of my favorite units, or it is my
Great.
favorite unit, one of my favorite devices. So definitely appreciate you coming on here and taking the time and
Sure.
and educating me and educating everybody else who's watching this.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. I'll talk to you again soon.
See ya.